Hello and welcome back to Outward Home Learning. This is computer science and the topic that you're looking at today is protocols and standards. So this is one of those topics where there's actually quite a lot to remember and it's definitely worth reviewing quite regularly. But we're going to go over to Mr. Holton who's going to explain it all to you.
Standards and protocols then. So what's kind of key to understand here is that computers thrive really, and the people who use them thrive on predictability. So if everything is unpredictable and everyone does their own thing on the internet, how to create hardware and how to send messages on the internet, then computers really can't communicate, or only a small number of them can. But if everyone agrees to follow a standard set of rules for how to sort of communicate and how hardware functions, then everything gets a lot easier. And I'll give you some examples of that, but let's just cover that as a definition. So a standard is an agreed set of rules for manufacturers and developers to follow. So that is people who are making hardware and software. That's important to sort of state. And I'll give you an example of this. So USB, for example, you almost certainly have some devices in your computer connected to your computer via USB. So I've got my microphone, I've got a mouse, I've got keyboards, all connected via USB. That is an agreed upon standard. It's a hardware standard. Can you imagine if each different component on your PC had a slightly different connection? How much more complicated that would be for everyone to use. And it kind of did used to be that way, I will say. It hasn't always been that everything's got a USB cable at the end of it to connect it to the computer. It wasn't always like that. And can you imagine then as well that maybe a different manufacturer, so like a Logitech mouse, for example, had a slightly different connection to a Microsoft mouse? Well, we'd get into trouble there, wouldn't we? You'd have lots of different cables and computers would have to have lots of different ports on them and everything would be a lot more complicated. So if we all follow the same standard of USB to connecting to a computer physically, so it's right from sort of the size of the actual port itself, so how big that is, to how electrical signals are sent along it, then we have an agreed standard, and it is very, very useful to us as users, but also to manufacturers as well. But this has also hit developers as well. So HTML is another example of a standard. That's a software standard. So that is something where we have all agreed that web pages should be communicated in a particular format using this thing called HTML. And if you tried to send a web page across the internet in a format which wasn't HTML, well, no browser would be able to understand it, because every internet browser we have is primed to follow HTML as a standard. Okay, so there's a couple of examples of really useful standards that we have across the internet. So where do protocols come in? Well, protocols are standards, but they are particularly standards which are all about communicating between different computers. So these are a set of rules for how a computer can communicate to another computer on a network. So they are standards, but they're sort of like the specialized standards, all to do with communication. And we're going to go through a few different ones here and how they are useful. So the first couple that we can tick off is HTTP and then we'll do HTTPS. These are all about sending web pages again. So if I'm sending a web page across the internet, I will actually use both HTML and HTTP to do that. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTPS is the secure version of HTTP. So depending on what you're doing, you either want to use HTTP or HTTPS. The big difference here, I'm just going to write, it's this one, but it's got secure on the end. The big difference here is that it is encrypted, and that is so important. That means that if somebody was to intercept your data, maybe you're browsing your bank website and you're looking at your bank account, for example, so it's got all your account details on. If somebody was to intercept that communication between you and your bank, it wouldn't matter because it is encrypted, so they wouldn't be able to read it. And have a look for the video about encryption so you can find out more about that. But yeah, it's all about browsing websites securely. So they're two easy ones to remember, all about looking at web pages. We've also got TCP/IP, and this is all about how you send data through a network. It stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and then you've got Internet Protocol as well. And this is all about sending data through a network. And have a look at the separate video all about IP addressing if you want a little bit more information about how that's done. So HTTP, HTTPS, TCP/IP. We also have FTP. Now that is a file transfer protocol. That is all about how to move big bits of data, so big files rather than web pages, from one place in the internet to another. Okay, the next three protocols that you need to be aware of are all to do with email. So I'll just quickly put up an example. Imagine that you are sending an email and you're doing it from Gmail to, I don't know, ilovecheese.com. Okay. So here is your email here. To send that email to ilovecheese.com, there's only one real option to do it, and that is using something called SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. So that sends emails between email servers. And look, here's your email. It's just been sent by SMTP, so it's now there. It's in ilovecheese.com. But now there's a couple of different options because you've not received your email yet. Look, you're here. Let's pretend you're the marketing person at ilovecheese.com and you're looking on your phone. You've not received your email yet. And there's a couple of different options for you to get that email. The first one is called IMAP, and that's the one which tends to be used a lot more these days. So this is the Internet Message Access Protocol. So that lets you get your email from your email server, but it critically does not delete the email after you have received it, after you have downloaded it. So a copy of it will stay on that server forever. So using your IMAP, you're going from here now to here onto your phone. So you see the difference? SMTP is going from your Gmail account to ilovecheese.com, and then IMAP is getting it from that that email server there to your phone or device at home. So IMAP is one option, but there is actually another option as well that we can take if we're downloading emails, and that is using POP, which is the Post Office Protocol. Now that does exactly the same thing as IMAP, and it's actually POP3 that we use, but the big difference is that it deletes the email after you have got a copy of it. So they are all the protocols you need to be aware of. If you've got all the protocols in your head, you know what a protocol is and you can explain it and you can describe what a standard is as well, then you're all sorted.
So it's now time for your first task. In the first task, you need to complete the table to identify the different protocols. So you're given a description and you need to match it to one of the protocols. You've got about 10 minutes to do this. It might not take you a full 10 minutes, so obviously you can skip the video on if you need to. 10 minutes starting now. And that is time up. So I'm hoping that you managed to complete that in time. We're now going to go to Mr. Barnes, who will review your answers.
Okay, so let's have a look at this activity all about protocols. So at the top here we've got 9 different protocols, and then we've got 9 different descriptions, and what we've got to do is we've got to match the protocol to the description. So let's go for splits data into packets and sets the rules for how devices connect on a network. Okay, well that is part of the TCP IP protocol, which actually technically is 2 protocols. So the TCP protocol sort of splits the data into packets and set the rules on how to connect and transmit. Okay, so transmission control protocol splits the data into packets, so it's splitting it up, getting it ready to transmit it. So next then we've got used by a web browser to communicate with web servers and access websites. So we've got 2 options here straight away. When you go on a web page, you'll see at the top it's got HTTP, but we've got 2 types. We've got HTTP and HTTPS. Well, S is the secure one that uses encryption, so there's no mention of encryption here, so I'm going to go with HTTP. Next one then, we've got a set of rules for transferring data over a network, usually using packet switching. Well, that's the second part of the TCP IP protocol, so that is IP, the Internet Protocol. So it's the thing that is the rules for transmitting data over a network. Right, so we're now on to emails. So used to receive emails from a server, emails are not deleted from the server when you download them. Well, that is the IMAP protocol. Okay, so the IMAP protocol is the one that we use these days pretty much for all email, and that's because we've got loads and loads of devices that we access our emails from. So it might be a smartphone, a computer, a laptop, lots of different devices. Now if each time you accessed your email on that device, it downloaded it and then deleted it, when you go to use it on another device, those emails won't be there, and that won't be very useful. So the IMAP protocol allows you to synchronize your devices with your email as well. So then we've got used to connect devices together using cables in a LAN. Well, that one should be fairly straightforward. That is going to be Ethernet. Okay, with your Ethernet cables. And Next, we've got encrypts the data sent from a web browser to a web server. So HTTP was the one without encryption. HTTPS is going to be the one with encryption. We've got use to move files between devices on a network. So that would be the FTP protocol for File Transfer Protocol. And then we've got use to receive emails from a server. Emails are downloaded and then deleted. So that is the POP, or as we normally call it, POP3, because it's version 3 of that protocol. So what's interesting with that is if I go on my computer and use the POP protocol, it will download them to my computer. So if I go to another device, those emails that it just downloaded will not appear on that other device. And last but not least then is used to send emails, and we've got SMTP, or Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Okay. So there are your protocols and the descriptions of what they do.
So it's now time for your exam style question. For this, there's kind of 3 sub-questions that you need to complete, 6 marks worth in total, and then we will review the answers afterwards. So you've got 10 minutes starting now. And that is time up. So we're now going to go over to Mr. Barnes, who'll review those answers. Please make sure you correct them as you go if you need to. So over to Mr. Barnes.
Right, let's have a look at these exam questions then as part of our deliberate practice on protocols. So we've got here, when connecting computers into a network, the use of appropriate protocols are important. Explain what is meant by a protocol. So you've looked at the different types of protocols, POP, IMAP, SMTP, etc. Now, all protocols are an agreed set of rules to be followed when communicating over a network. Because if everyone used their own language to communicate, no one will be able to understand each other. So if everyone agrees we're going to do this in this way, that makes it far easier. So moving on then, we've then got, for each of the scenarios below, identify the most appropriate protocol to be used and explain the function of the protocol. So a user wants to transfer a file directly from his computer to a friend's computer. So 2 marks, we get 1 mark for correctly identifying the protocol and 2nd mark for explaining what it does. So if they're transferring files, they're going to use FTP, okay, which is the file transfer protocol. So FTP will be used as this allows for one device to send to another. For example, a client sending to a server. So you quite often use FTP when you want to upload to things like web hosting, because the web hosting is on a server, you've got the client, you're transferring your files. Right, next one then, a customer wants to securely log on to her bank's website to check her bank account balance. So we've got 2 protocols for websites, HTTP and HTTPS. So they want to do it securely, so we're going to say HTTPS should be used as this encrypts the data when sending or receiving from the website. Okay, and then last but not least, and then we'll go through the answers, explain the difference between how the IMAP protocol and SMTP protocol are used. Okay, 2 marks. We just need to say what one does and what the other does. So IMAP is used to download a copy of an email to a device. SMTP is used to send email. So I've said how both work, so it should be 1 mark for each. Right, let's go through the mark scheme then. So back to the first question, we've got explain what is meant by protocol. Let's change the colour of my pen, let's go for green. So we've got here, protocols are an I've wrote agreement, it probably should say agreed, an agreed set of rules to be followed. So I've got here an agreed set of rules to be followed when communicating over a network for how computers should communicate. 2 marks, perfect. Okay, moving on. So the next one, we've got a user wants to transfer a file directly. What should they use? So I've said FTP, that gets me 1 mark. And then I've said it is used as this allows for one device to send to another. For example, a client sending to a server. So I said it allows for sends from a client to a server. Perfect, 2 marks. Okay, moving on. Let's move this up a bit more. So then we've got a customer wants to securely log into her bank's website to check her account balance. So I've said HTTPS, which gets me 1 mark here. And I've then said as it encrypts the data, so encrypts the connection/data, so perfect, 2 marks. And then last but not least, explain the difference between IMAP and SMTP. So I've said IMAP is used to download a copy of an email to a device. So we've got here IMAP retrieves access, downloads a copy of the email. Perfect. And SMTP sends email, used to send email. Perfect. 2 marks. And there's your answers.
So that's everything you need to know about protocols and standards. But as I said at the start, make sure you review them regularly so that you remember them. See you next time.